Good afternoon. We're ready. Can I stay here? Just in case I don't want to. I'm positive. Good afternoon, everyone, and please forgive our tardy. We have some commissioners that are in traffic, but we are going to get started with the presentation. I will do my best to take copious notes so that I can give the information back to them. We're going to get started with the presentation on policy ACB, which is currently titled Sex-Based Discrimination for Employees, along with that regulation. And thanks to Chief Grant Skinner, who is here with us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcus Winder. I'm the manager for EEO and Title IX compliance for city schools. Fairly new to city schools. I've been here since last month, starting on December 9th. But
that is my birthday, since we were talking about birthdays earlier.
Nice. Yeah, so I've been here for a little over a month now. And one of my first tasks since being here was assisting in the revising of the ACB policy and its regulations thereafter. So thank you for the opportunity for me to come down and speak with you all about this policy and its revision and where I believe it should go in conjunction with the regulations as well. So thank you. And this is the clicker, I'm assuming it is. Okay. All right, so as it stands now, the current policy of ACB is entitled Sexual Harassment for Employees. But in moving forward and getting the policy in line with, state, federal, and guidelines from the EEOC, we need to change the policy and to reflect all protected classes and statuses, including sexual orientation, transgender status, gender identity, and other policy as well. So with that being said, the proposed policy expands protections of employees and the third parties to extend beyond sexual harassment. So now, I think this policy is important in its revision because it explicitly states, what the protected class and statuses are, and how you can go about knowing what your rights are and how to move forward with the complaint if you'd like to do so. So the EEOC's guidelines, and as you may or may not know, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they enforce Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And in that, it also prohibits discrimination against someone for the basis of their race, their color, their religion, their national origin, or their sex, which also includes their sexual orientation and gender identity as well. All of these policies and legislative matters inform the revision of the policy, and along with the groundwork that was laid with JBB. The work that was done with JBB directly informs how this policy was moving forward and how it's going to change and be revised, and for a number of reasons, which I'll discuss throughout the entire presentation. As I previously mentioned, federal law like Title IX, Title VII, have informed the revision of this policy. And extending beyond sexual harassment, discrimination based on sex, it includes sexual violence, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And just so you all know, Title IX is something that also only protects students. It protects parents, guardians, and employees as well. So that's why Title IX is also still important for employees to be aware of and realize what it is, beyond what their mandated reporting statuses may be. And again, just reiterating that state law is also a component of the revision of this policy as well. In similar fashion, on Title VII, Maryland state law prohibits discrimination in the workplace based on protected classes or statuses as well. So discrimination as far as your race, your sexual orientation, gender identity, whether you're transgender, cisgender, even, all of that is still prohibited under the policy, whether it's state law, federal law, or guidelines from the EEOC. And going back to Title IX really quick, the Office of Civil Rights generally enforces Title IX nationwide. And with that being said, the OCR, which is a short term for Office of Civil Rights, they also provide guidelines surrounding Title IX and reporting and addressing Title IX matters as well. So the EEO and Title IX Compliance Manager, which is myself, I'll oversee sex-based discrimination investigations, whether they're for employees or students. And that's going to include notice requirements, and that's in regards to if there is an issue as far as Title IX or Title VII is concerned in regards to discrimination. It will come to my office, and then I will notify parties that are involved in an investigation at the beginning of the investigation, and keep them informed throughout the entire investigation up until we release findings for that particular case. And it's going to include confidentiality and a timeline for the completion as well. Now, generally, investigations, as the best practice, they take 60 days for completion. That's just something important to note. So the goals of the proposed policy is to update the discrimination and harassment policy so it addresses each category protected by local, state, and federal law. Provide clear procedures for investigations so no one is misinformed or doesn't have any idea of what's happening with their case. The more people are informed about what's going on with their case as far as the procedures are concerned, the better off it is for everyone that's involved in that particular case as well. And also just establishing a holistic policy for regulations for employees that are also in line with Title VII, Title IX, and also Maryland state law as well. And so this non-discrimination statement here is actually from ACA, another policy that's within city schools located on board docs. And this is something that has been placed into ACB's revision, just so at the beginning of that policy, people who are reading it are aware of that this is a non-discrimination statement for city schools, and that's how we operate in all capacities, whether it's in hiring, whether it's in teaching, whether it's in just the general workplace. It's a non-discrimination environment. And so a little earlier I mentioned how this policy revision was directly informed by JBB and also federal, state, and EEOC guidelines. But as far as the definitions are concerned, the definitions directly mirror some of the new ones that were added to JBB. And the reason for that is just consistency amongst the policies. So some definitions such as gender expression, transgender, transition, and cisgender were added to the revision of this policy, and mirroring policy JBB as well. And so since this policy is based upon sex-based discrimination, there are some things that go along with that need to be discussed and for staff on what everyone in city schools should be aware of moving forward. That would include the use of pronouns and names, dress codes, access to gender-segregated facilities, an employee's personnel record, and also how an employee is able to request changing their name or their gender officially within city schools. So as far as use of pronouns and names, generally an employee wouldn't have to go through the process legally to have their name changed within city schools, Office of Human Capital. They would generally simply have to just inform their supervisors what name that they go by, what pronouns that they would like to use for them and how they identify. And that's what should be used moving forward when addressing that particular employee. So if an employee is transitioning or transgender, or they have another name that you or may have been aware of, once you first met them, and it's now something else, that's what you should refer to them as, and that's what also the pronouns you should use as well. Whether it's him, she, they, their, whatever that person would like for you to use as their pronouns, that's what should be respected and used moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean that the employee can't change their name legally within human capital with the personnel records, but it does mean that their wishes should be adhered to. And as far as dress codes are concerned, employees may dress in accordance with their individual gender identity and gender expression. Dress codes designated for the workplace shall be gender neutral, and city schools cannot enforce a dress code more strictly against a transgender and non-conforming employees than cisgendered employees. So that's just stating that you can wear what your dress according to your gender identity, And also be professional, of course, but in the workplace should be gender neutral. As far as access to bathrooms facilities are concerned, employees must have equal access to common bathroom facilities that correspond to that employee's gender identity. Employees cannot be required or directed to use a private restroom as a result of someone simply wanting them to do so. So if someone's supervisor is, for example, saying, "Hey, you must use this bathroom for this particular reason," that's definitely something that shouldn't be happening. So no matter what someone's gender identity may be, they can use the restroom that's assigned to them as far as their identity is concerned.
But based on the policy draft, if that person feels uncomfortable, they can request a separate bathroom space?
100%.
Okay.
And definitely get some guidelines and of where that person can go, whether it's in this floor or different floor or what have you, just so
Yep.
that they're comfortable as well.
Yep.
Personnel records. As I previously mentioned, employees can go to the Office of Human Capital to provide information, documentation in regards to changing their name on their personnel records. Whether it's, for example, if you go to the Office of Human Capital and provide documentation that signifies you're changing your name legally, then all of the information that's within city schools and your personnel records, that's what your name will be changed to. And again, just because an employee does not do this doesn't mean you are not supposed to refer to them as the name that they want to be referred to or the pronouns that they want you to use for them. So it's always important to ask, just a tidbit for me, I always ask someone what their pronouns may be if I'm unsure of myself, and always just following that up all the time, just so they're aware that I know what their pronouns are and they know mine too. This is just an example. Some of the documents an employee can use to change their name legally within the state as well, but also within city schools and their personnel records, can be a new or an amended birth certificate, a date court order signed by a magistrate or a judge, a statement by a healthcare practitioner, and you submit that documentation to Human Capital, and then they will process that information and change your name and your personnel records moving forward. So reporting incidents of sex-based discrimination. These next few slides are just going to go over how the previous regulations and policy are differ from the proposed one that's going to be moving forward. So ACBRA, the regulations for the sexual harassment for employees policy, they only applied to instances of sexual harassment and didn't necessarily outline the protected classes or statuses that are outlined in the revised policy. So the ACBRA, the proposed one, addresses each form of sex-based discrimination. It requires principals to inform my office immediately of an instance of sex-based discrimination. And I am responsible for overseeing the investigation into those matters and keeping those parties informed, whether they are the complaining party or the respondent, about the status of their case, and ultimately the findings that will be given out thereafter. Another instance that's not been addressed in the previous regulations were instances of employee harassment. There are no current guidelines on that, but it is something that does occur. Generally, maybe not with, younger students, like elementary school students and so on and so forth, but these are something that I've seen throughout my career, instances where and students have harassed employees. And just so just so we're all clear about how it can be reported, I added this to the proposed ACB as well. So that means that employee principals must notify my office immediately within 1 business day of receiving that complaint. And I'm responsible for notifying labor relations as well, just so that they're aware of what is going on, and in case there needs to be accommodations and so on and so forth that need to occur. And that complaint will be investigated by my office. The principal and the designee of the employee's school working with the principal of the student's school as well, they directly must let me know what's going on so I can process that information and, provide accommodations and conduct the investigation as needed. So the previous regulations outline the investigatory process, and this one does too, but I think this is more in depth. The EEO compliance manager will conduct the investigation, as I previously mentioned, and the preponderance of evidence standard is used, and that's outlined in the revision of the policy as well. And as previously mentioned, 60 days is the best practice for completing an investigation for these types of matters. And again, a written notice will be provided to all parties if a deadline can't be met. So that means if it has to be an extension, then all parties will be notified officially, so they are aware of what that extension is for and how long the extension is going to be needed. Complaint resolutions consist of findings and the next steps, and that may be referral to the ILED, student homeless related services, school police. Again, labor relations would already be involved. Just so we know how to proceed, because it may result in someone being removed from position or changing schools or some other form of accommodation that may need to be met. So the previous regulations didn't require employees to be provided with the contact information for the person in my position or in my office. The proposed regulations contain that information as far as who I am, what my role is for city schools, and also that training will be provided to staff. And it's my understanding that there is training that's already in place, but new training, the training will be updated just as much as this policy has been, so staff members are aware that the policy has been revised and it is changing, and that there are some things that they will need to be aware of and comply with in order to proceed, at city schools as a staff member, or teacher, or whatever the role they may be serving in. And this is just a list of some of the stakeholders that I will be following up with thereafter to get their feedback and information that they can provide me to make this policy something that's where everyone's involved and that needs to be involved in it. LGBTQ Commission, Associated Student Congress of Baltimore City, PCAB, Maryland Legal Aid, all of these stakeholders are important to the revision of this policy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Winder.
Yes, sir.
Correct?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
Mr. Winder. I appreciate your attention to this policy. I'm going to invite Commissioner Roberts up if she has any questions or comments concerning the policy as
Yes.
well. What I will say in his absence, Dr. Brooks, Commissioner Brooks, I know is very passionate about this particular topic. So in reaching out to stakeholders, I'm sure that he'll want to actually sit down and probably do some referencing also with the policy. So I just want to highlight that. And I appreciate you including these stakeholders who you will get in touch with. As far as what you were mentioning a few moments ago about the student to teacher versus the teacher to student, which would be addressed. I was trying to find it specifically in the policy and regulation, and I can't. Could you help me find where you were talking about? You said you added some language in the policy that referred to student to teacher harassment.
Correct. I don't have the policy in front of me, but it's not necessarily student to teacher, it's student to employee in general. So
That's what I mean.
okay,
yes.
understood. So I don't have the policy right in front of me, but I definitely have it. If you have it, thank you. Give me 1 second, sir, please. It's the regulation.
I believe one place is in the definitions under definition P. There's a sentence added there indicating sexual harassment can be committed by a student, employee, or third party.
Yeah.
So would it be, how appropriate would it be to add something to this policy or perhaps to the regulation that would speak to how that is handled?
Okay.
If that makes sense. If there could be some sort of, and I know that we have our legal counsel here also, I would be curious to know, because if we mention it, how would we regulate that, if that makes sense?
Well, so what do you mean by
So
regulate?
if there is a student that makes a pass at a staff member or makes a staff member feel uncomfortable, how would we then handle that? Yes, we have JBB, but in regards to ACB now, what would be the response in this regard?
It would be a similar response in that accommodations may have to be administered for that employee or even for the student. For example, let's say the student harassed an employee and it was a teacher, for example, and they're in the same classroom. Maybe this student needs to be in another classroom for the duration of the investigation, or change the teacher's schedule for the duration of the investigation until a finding has been made. So a final determination can be made in regards to that particular case.
I think that there should be some clarity in that regard in the regulation. If we could flag that, I would appreciate that. Then also, just a few things. The policy, it deals with two things, if I'm understanding correctly. It is dealing with gender-based discrimination, and it is also dealing with sexual harassment. Is it possible to be clear about that in the naming of the policy versus just sex-based discrimination? When I think of sex-based discrimination, I think it could be a plethora of things. So is it also possible to define, because I didn't see that clearly in the policy, to define what sex-based discrimination is? Or could we change the title of the policy to be gender-based discrimination and sexual harassment?
So
Now, I see what you were referring to in the federal, in law. So I think that's what we were trying to pattern after. But to a person like me, or to the folks that we serve, I think it should just be clear, especially when going through board docs, because it can be overwhelming for a lot of people, to clearly see the policy that they're going after. So yes, it is one, and after reading the policy, it is clear what we're talking about, but I think that we should specify and define what sex-based discrimination is, because I didn't see that outlined anywhere in the policy.
So I understand what you're saying. So sex-based discrimination definitely includes everything that you just brought up as well, as far as gender-based and sexual harassment. So that is something that I will definitely take into consideration for sure moving forward.
I appreciate that. And I definitely, yes, I just think it needs to be defined in there. Not in the regulation, but in the actual policy, in Roman numeral 2.
Okay.
Roman numeral 2, letter E.
Okay.
We crossed out substitute teachers where it says, and perhaps Chief Grant Skinner, you can provide some insight. Instead of saying long-term substitutes or long-term temporary employees, aren't they temporary either way? So for employee, in defining who that is, it says includes all full-time, part-time, temporary employees, and long-term. Could it just be temporary employees?
I think it can. I
mean,
don't know if there was an other intention here, but I do think it could just say includes all full-time, part-time, and temporary employees.
So my understanding is that these are just all the forms of employment that can be had within city schools, so just outlining all of them. It could possibly be just temporary employees, because temporary is temporary, but it's just a matter of outlining each form or type of employee that can exist within city schools. But I understand what you're saying.
just for me, again, I think to clear up any ambiguity, just leave it as temporary employees because they're all considered temporary. And then this is a thought that I had for that same section in letter P, where we have the definitions where it goes to sexual harassment.
Yes.
And I'm glad that legal counsel is here. Because nowhere in the policy do we include digital harassment and how we handle that. So it could include email, it could include social media. What do we do in an instance where someone is being harassed or feel uncomfortable, they feel uncomfortable with things that are happening digitally? And in the digital age, we can't necessarily monitor, and I was looking at what some other states and school systems were doing. We can't necessarily monitor a person's social media per se, but in the event that an employee has something against another employee or whatever, how do we handle that? How do we deal with that? And I would be curious to know if we've referenced that, or if we can reference it before it comes to first reader with our legal office to see what the parameters would be around that and how we would then handle a digital type of offense.
That's actually a great question, and in response to that, if whatever's going on Twitter, Facebook, or what have you, if it's sex-based, then it's still harassment under the policy regardless. So whether it's on a digital platform or whether it's in person or whether it's over the phone, these are all still forms of harassment nonetheless. And even if it wasn't a form of harassment under this policy in particular, and it's two employees or one employee saying something about another employee that came to light somehow and it affected the workspace in some capacity, that's something that can still be looked at within possibly the staff investigations unit. But regardless, if it's online or in person, if it's still based around sex-based discrimination, it's still going to be under the policy. So it's not explicitly written out in here, though.
I was just going to say.
Come to and just want to make sure and for the sake of the minutes, just let us know who you are.
Tamal Banton, Acting Chief Legal Counsel. There
Yes,
is
sir.
language we can add that would encompass digital communications as well as.
I appreciate that.
We'll look into that, of course.
Thank you. I mean, because we're in that age,
Yeah.
and I think our board is more in tune to that than previous boards, but it is becoming a way of the world, a way that we communicate. So I think in policy, we need to address that. So I appreciate that. And then finally, after reading through the policy, it's fine because it's those three options. But for the name changing process, when at first glance it just looked very extensive, like a lot of hoops that a person had to go to just to let us know that this is what they prefer to be, referred or called as or referred to, but then it's three options. So it's not that extensive. You just have to have one of those three.
Correct. Whether
Whether it's a birth certificate or whether it is some. So I'm fine with that. But at first glance, it just looked like a whole lot. Well, do people? It just looked like the whole lot, but it's not. So.
In the sense that, did you feel as though it was required for all three of those documents to be submitted?
It just took me some time to actually just say, it's not all three, it's just one of the three. So it's fine.
Understood.
I'm just saying it because it was in my notes before I actually read through the whole thing.
I got you. I thank you for saying that.
But I appreciate the work that you've done. Commissioner Roberts?
Hello.
Hi.
I just have one question. For slide 11,
The use of names and pronouns?
yes.
Okay.
For me, it just seems like that could potentially be a disconnect with a person being identified by their chosen pronouns and name just in the specific workplace. Are they only recognized by the legal documentation, their name change and their gender change, if they submit this?
Well, no, he said, you said earlier, no. Like,
No.
if a person, if that is what they choose to be referred to, then we have to refer to them. But if they legally want that change, like on their documentation and for the
Then-
sake of maybe records, employee records, then they would have to submit one of those three things.
Okay,
Correct.
that was my only question.
If I understood
I
correctly.
needed
that was-
clarity.
that was
That was
clear.
it?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
But if I look like a man today, I still want to be referred to as Miss, then you have to refer to me as Miss. But if I want it changed for our record's sake, then one of those three.
That's correct.
Mr. Gant, anything? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Winder, for that. And hopefully we'll make sure that Commissioner James Hassan, I know that she will have certain things to send over, and I'm certain that Dr. Brooks will also, before it comes to first reader, so just look out for those things.
For sure. So there will be another opportunity like this to speak to those individuals?
No,
or-
the next time it comes to the board, it will come to the full board for first reader,
Okay.
which is March 10th. So there'll be, between now and then, you'll have that opportunity to engage with the other commissioners, but also with the stakeholders that you listed in your presentation, to talk to them before it comes to the full board for first reader.
Okay.
And then we still won't vote on it until second reader. So there'll still be an opportunity for more revision. And to really get, I really would like to have more student voice and input
Okay.
in this also. Even though it isn't JBB, I would be curious to hear more of their perspective in regards to this, too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I thank you for the time, and I appreciate you all listening to the presentation and asking those very pertinent questions in regards to the policy. And if there are any other questions looming, I would love to answer them for you.
Thank you. Well, you're not going anywhere just yet. I mean, you
No,
can
for
take
sure,
your
just-
things away from the table, but I am going to open it up for some comment, because we do have a parent here that would like to engage with us also.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, just having a seat right behind you, and we're going to invite Ms. Kim Mooney up to the table, one of our active and engaged parents.
Thanks for remembering me. My son actually graduated some time ago, but I'm still an employee here. So my name's Kimberly Mooney. I am the board chair of GLSEN Maryland, and I also work here in Human Capital. So first, I want to thank you so very much for proposing these changes, because a lot of this we discussed when we were talking about JBB, and at the time, the response seemed to be, well, staff already have protections. And at the time, we tried to say, well, they're not spelled out in the way that they should be. So this is like an enormous step, so I really appreciate that. I also have in writing what I'm going to say, so I can give it to you. But so there were just a couple of things that I would flag. On slide 11 of the presentation itself, the slideshow, it says gender-neutral employees. They made the same error in JBB initially. People don't generally consider themselves gender neutral. They consider themselves non-binary. So that would be the correct terminology to use there.
And that is also it's in the definitions, but I think to be consistent, we
Yes.
could make that change there.
On slide 15 for name and gender changes, it says to submit the proper documentation to Human Capital, but it doesn't actually indicate a point person or even like a specific place within Human Capital. And that sort of thing is obviously really sensitive personal information, so we wouldn't want it just like floating around. So it might bear you may want it to be more specific than that. In fact, the same issue exists with JBB. So some parents have notified me that it took months for them to find the right person to submit their documentation to, when they needed their child's record updated. And the policy right now just says the Office of Transfers and Enrollment. But it doesn't say a person's name, email address, phone number, anything in there, so they don't actually know who to go to, and they get bounced around to different offices. On slide 19, the training that it refers to, with Mr. Winder's predecessor, I had conversations about what training looks like, and currently we just have like an online module, which is not sufficient for staff to really know what they should be doing proactively. I just wanted to say, as the representative of GLSEN Maryland, that I'm really excited that we're on the slide presentation, so please do reach out to us. I'm also a founding member of the BTU's LGBTQ subcommittee of the Civil, Human, and Women's Rights Committee, and we've met and have some interest in this and would love to contribute to just refining it. And it would be really helpful if the school board had some conversation about the turnover in the EO office, because this is the third person in this role in the last 7 months. So in terms of continuity and just being able to implement JBB, I know supposedly something went out on the leadership action update, but there was no training in regard to how to actually implement JBB in schools. So I think the same issue exists with this. Like, Mr. Winder seems awesome, but I just hope that like he stays and that there's some like continuity so that these things can be implemented not just on paper but like in reality.
I appreciate you, and the person that will be able to handle that is sitting right here with us, Chief Grant Skinner, so I'm sure that he's very responsive, so I know that he heard you in that regard, and I'm sure we'll have some sort of discussion and follow-up before we come back for first reader. Thank you also for bringing up BTU for this, and I know they're listening, so y'all please don't kill me, but I didn't see them on here as a stakeholder to engage, and I think that's important. I think also including
It is on there. It's the last one, but it doesn't say BTU. It says
it just says
bargaining.
collective bargaining
like,
units.
yeah, by.
You know, but I'm a teacher,
Call us
so
out.
it would be nice to see that
Yeah.
because it's one of our largest groups of
Yes.
employees that we have working in the system. So I think it is important. But thank you for that. Thank you for your comments.
Thanks.
Dr. Brooks, we were waiting for you. How are you?
Good to be here.
Good.
Sorry.
So, are there any questions or comments that you have?
Not at the moment.
Okay, not at the moment. So, Mr. Winder is going to Well, I don't think anyone else is here. I want to thank our legal counsel for being here also. This is vitally important, so I appreciate you all being here. And if there's nothing else, Commissioner Roberts, okay? Thank you. We're going to adjourn our meeting today. Our next meeting, it is up on the screen. It is February 18th. It is the day after, I think, that is President's Day, I think. I could be wrong, but I think it's that day. And we're going to meet here at 3:30, and we're going to be looking at two policies, JBEH, legal representation, and then IHBV, gifted and advanced learning. As always, folks can sign up for public comment. I think it is a week, I think it's Thursday before? Till Monday evening. So folks have an opportunity to sign up Monday evening to speak publicly at our meetings based on those two policies that are coming up, or anything else that you think the policy committee needs to focus on and pay attention to. We are adjourned today at 4:19. Have a beautiful afternoon.